So let's stuff a turkey for Thanksgiving. First step is we need to make the stuffing. And so here we are, we have 3/4 of a cup of figs. I quartered them. You also have to make sure that you cut the top stemmy part off. I have 3/4 of a cup of dried cranberries. I have half a cup of brandy plus half a cup of water. I have 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I have, it's either 2 large onions or 3 small onions. I have 3 small onions. This is supposed to be 3 stalks of celery, but I only had 2, so we're gonna make it work. A pound of sausage. This is just plain breakfast sausage. No maple, no extra stuff, just plain breakfast sausage. We have 1 tablespoon of rosemary, fresh, 1 tablespoon of fresh sage, 3 tablespoons of toasted pine nuts. I toasted them myself, just in a dry pan over heat. Just keep swirling until they get a little brown and you can start to smell them. I have 3 cups of dry bread, so like stuffing mix. And then I have 1.5 cups of my homemade chicken stock. Down the road, I'm going to need an egg and salt and all that kind of stuff. But first, let's get this stuff in the pan, shall we? See you at the range. So back here, we have the brandy, the water, the figs, and the cranberries. And they just started simmering, so we're gonna let those simmer for 2 minutes and then kill the heat. Up here, we have our butter, which just melted. We're gonna push in all of our onions, all of our celery. And we're gonna sweat this until translucent. I don't know when I started sauteing with a rice paddle, but I actually prefer it. I really like that flat edge right there. It's really good for scraping. See you in a minute when this is done. Our vegetables are getting nice and sweat, and so I'm going to crank the heat up to a medium-high temperature. I'm going to add our sausage. And I'm going to break it up. And I am going to just cook it until it gets a little brown and break it up into little pieces. And then you can see how much of this is already like soaked up that liquid. It's just like a sponge. And so when this is nice and brown, we're gonna add all of our fruit to this. I'll see when that happens. Sausage is now cooked. We're getting some nice little brown bits down at the bottom. So all that we are going to do is kill the heat. We're going to take our fruit and alcohol and water. We're going to put it in here. And we're going to scrape up all that fond off the bottom of the pan. And we're just going to let it cool down for a couple minutes before we go on to the next step. So the next step has eggs in it. So we don't want this to cook the eggs. So it needs to be, we need to be able to touch it without it burning us. See you in a couple minutes. So in this bowl, I have 1 egg, which will help bind our stuffing together. I'm gonna break down the membrane. And then I'm gonna take my breadcrumbs and my pine nuts and my herbs, and I'm gonna add them in here. I have my stuffing, which is now cooled, but before I add it, I meant to do this on camera before, I'm just gonna add some salt, which I have not added yet. I like to cook things down a little bit before I add seasoning, just so I don't over season. It's like mushrooms. There's lots of water inside. You wanna cook all that water off before you add your seasoning. And so it is cool to the touch, which means it's not going to cook anything like our eggs. Hear my son yelling in the background, playing some game where you take bananas out of a thing and it makes a monkey pop in the air. It's crazy. Anyway, so here we are. We have our stuffing, and I don't want to mix this too much. Oh, you know what I forgot? I forgot to add my chicken stock. And this is a lot of chicken stock, and chicken stock is not salted either. So I'm just gonna give it one more little bit of salt. I mean, when you watch one of my videos at night and all of my family is home, you don't just get me, you get the entire family. So all I'm gonna do is mix this up. As you see, I am spinning the bowl, and this is a folding method, which I normally use for like meringues and stuff, but there we go. So here is our turkey. I am prepared to go dirty hand, which is not something I normally do, but I'm gonna be dead honest. I've only ever done this one other time, and it was about a decade and a half ago. So let me tell you about our bird. This is a 17-pound bird. I would have gotten one smaller, but that's all that they had at the Giant. Like I have said earlier, we don't need this because this is going to cook our bird to about 185 degrees. So we're just gonna throw that in the trash. I have this right here, and I'm gonna take that off in a minute. That trusses the back of the bird. Inside of our bird, we had this. We have the neck, we have the liver, we have the kidneys, I believe that's the kidneys, and we have 2 hearts. Ooh, do you think it's the doctor? Do you think it's a Time Lord? Oh, do you think that the doctor regenerated as a turkey? I hope not. Okay, anyway, if you didn't get that, that is a Doctor Who reference. Anyway, so I'm going to get started. Now, I'm going to try and film this. If it takes too long, I'll try and double it in speed. If it takes even long, if it's even too long for that, I might just do, I don't know, like some kind of cut scene. But anyway, I will post Jacque Pepin's version of him doing a chicken this style, and that's the one you really need to watch. I'll put it down in the description because it is unbelievable. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing I need to do is I need to take out the wishbone. And when you get a turkey, they give you all this extra skin, which I really don't want to cut off, because once we get to the Galantine part, we're really going to need some extra skin. So, So this took me a lot longer than I thought it would. All that you want to do is cut down on either side of the wishbone and then pull it out. On a turkey, it's a lot harder than a chicken. And so now what we're going to do is we are going to cut through I'm going to cut through the wing joint, and actually I'm going to cut them down here. So it's just like, this is just like doing a big chicken. And so I'm going to go around here just like as if I was doing an airline breast. And then I'm going to hyperextend it. And everything that I am cutting off, I am currently putting on my stock tray. So we cut off the wings. And then we're gonna cut off the tail. Oh, because we're cutting it apart so we can make it into a roulade, dear.
Why are we cutting its tail?
Well, because we need to take that off. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I am going to cut down, I'm going to find the joint, or as like Jacque Pepin says, and actually I'm going to cut some of the skin off and pray I don't need it later. I'm going to try and find the articulation. And so that is like right about there. And so you just feel where it is. We're just gonna cut in there. So I'm gonna double time this just to make this go a little faster. I forgot to put a cut down its spine just to give me an entry point for either side. So when you're doing this, it's kind of like breaking down a chicken but upside down. So rather than starting from the top, you start from the bottom. So I'm working my way toward that wing joint, and that is a ball and socket. So you kind of gotta hyperextend it and pop it out and get your knife between the 2 bones. And then just working my way back to the oyster. Make sure you get around the oyster because that definitely is the most tender part of the bird. And then you're just gonna kind of work your way, I guess, up the rib cage, completely opposite than you normally would when breaking down a chicken. It's literally just in reverse. You go around the oyster and then you go to the tail. That part is like when you're doing a regular bird. Don't forget to pop the joint, the hip joint out. That's going to help you hyperextend that joint so you can get between there. And then just work your way up to the keel bone, rubbing your knife against the bones. Because the more you rub your knife against the bones, the less meat you're going to leave on. And you're going to work all the way through. Now, it's super important that you don't pierce the skin at the keel bone or any place else, because what's going to happen is if you pierce the skin, well, then either your stuffing's going to come out or you're going to have exposed meat. You're trying to get this off almost like a meat jacket. So I did the other side, and if you notice, now I'm just flipping it back and forth, and I'm just trying to cut the top of that keel bone without getting the top, and there it is. So that's going to go into the stock. There's very little meat on it. So the just like on a chicken, the tenders are on the inside of the breast. And so actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tenders out. Now I have two choices. And look at that thing. Talk about a chicken finger. I'm either going to, normally when you do something like this, you would put them right here between the leg and the breast. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that yet, so I'm just going to put them aside. They do not pull out nearly as easy as on a chicken. And then all that I'm going to do is I'm going to concentrate on cutting out the bones of the thighs and the legs. Yes. So I did the first side, and the second side always goes much cleaner, much faster than the first side. So that's the one I'm showing you. All I'm doing is following the thigh bone, which is one single bone. And then I'm following the leg bone. And I'm pushing the skin back to make sure that I'm not cutting through the skin. If you cut through the meat and then you just push the skin over top, no one's even going to know that it even happened, because when the proteins coagulate of the meat, it's just going to coagulate back together and no one's going to know the wiser. So all that I'm doing is cutting around that thigh bone, working my way down, scraping my knife against the bone. And the hardest part is just getting around the joints. Once you get around the joints, it's much, much easier. I don't know if I showed this on camera, but what I did is I have this big old cleaver that was my great-grandfather's, and I used it to crack the knuckle at the end of the leg bone. So you're going to see in a second, once I scrape the meat down of this leg bone, I'm going to just literally pull it out. So I get about 3/4 of the meat off the leg bone, and I'm just going to Braveheart it out of the turkey leg. And this is really the longest part, is just trying to cut down, make the smallest slices possible, and just work it out. Oh, here it is. And you can see the leg when I flip it over that it looks just like a regular leg, but there's no bone inside. And I left the knuckle there just for presentation. I put the tenders back between the breasts and the leg or thigh bone or thigh meat. There's no bones there left. And now I'm going to work on the wings, which is essentially the same exact thing as the legs. And you just work it and pull it out. And then you flip it back out and it's all done. So at this point, we're kind of looking good. We have all of the bones out, except for these knuckles right here. Those are the only bones in the entire bird. And then so what we're also going to do is, to fill this void right here, we're just going to cut down into the breasts. We're going to make like flaps, like almost butterfly. Going to open that side up there, and then I don't know what that is, but we're taking that off. Going to butterfly it open here. There we go. That's looking pretty good. Okay, and now I think it's time for seasoning and stuffing. Now what you're going to do is you're going to salt. And I like to use kosher salt and salt super liberally. There is a ton of meat here, and the salt's going to do a couple things. One, it's going to bring out the natural flavors that your palate can't pick up without the salt. the point is to add enough salt that you can taste it, but without making it salty. Second thing it's going to do is, if you season the night before, it's going to go into the meat and it's going to lock in juices so it does not become dry. So I have my stuffing. As you see, I poured it on top and I am shoving it down into the legs. One, it's going to make the legs fantastic when you cut into it and there's stuffing inside. And secondly, it's also going to keep the shape of the leg so they're not like just flabby and flat, which would be completely weird. I get my wife to help me out because my hands are all dirty. And so just adding more and more until I think it is appropriate. And what I don't show you is all the extra stuffing. I just threw in a 9x9 pan and just baked it off, because who doesn't need extra stuffing? And some people don't like stuffing that's inside of a turkey because they think it's too wet. So I just flip it over, push it together, make sure that everything's inside, and flip the bird over. And then it's time to tie. It is time to tie. And so what we're going to do is a classic half hitch. So my wife helps hold the legs together as I tie a knot. And that will just keep everything from coming out the end. And this is kind of like trussing when you do a whole bird. So you can't see it, but I have my spool off screen in a bowl. And so I can pull on it and the string will come off, but the spool will not like flop onto the floor or go 1,000 places. And you can see how I'm just pulling and I'm kind of just like making a loop and then just pulling on it and just keeping tension. Now, if you're not comfortable with doing this, you can always just cut individual pieces of string and tie it around. That is completely acceptable. Actually, when I do reloading, that's exactly how I do it. But this, there's something that's really pretty about it. And the best part is if you mess it up, you can cut it off and do it again. And you can do it 1,000 times if you wanted to until it looks nice. And I guarantee after you do it a couple times, it's going to be way easier than it seems. So now that I'm at the end, I'm going to just hold tension on it. And then we're going to flip the whole thing over. And then this is where you cut a lot of string off. So my wife holds the string, I cut it, and then you're going to work it back towards the legs, and you're just going to go make a loop around the string that you've already done. So you just pull it around, and that will create tension on the bottom side. And if the bottom side doesn't look pretty, don't worry about it. No one's going to see it. And then once you get to the back, all that you have to do is tie it off on that excess string that you started with where you tied the legs together. And it looks really pretty. And it's ready for the oven. Oh, don't forget to season the outside. I don't think I filmed that. Okay, so it's hard to get everything in the camera, but we have our turkey. And I have my internal thermometer in the most center part of the bird, so I can tell when it hits 165. Because remember, I'm actually kind of against stuffing a bird, but if you are going to do it, the stuffing has to hit 165. The bird, I mean, obviously is going to be slightly overcooked, but since we salted it yesterday, hopefully the dry brine will keep the moisture in. And then it should be okay. And then I have I roasted off my other parts, so like the wings and the leg bones that I took out and stuff like that, and the carcass. And then I used my carrots, onions, and celery scraps. Well, just my celery and onion scraps because I didn't have carrots. I put those in the stock too. And so that is just going. I think it's super important that you roast off your bones beforehand to make a brown stock. And now I'm just going to use that to thicken for gravy. Now I will have pan drippings from here too that I will save for like other things, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I'm already hitting the ground running. So I am going to put 1 cup or just over a cup of water in the bottom, and that's going to keep the drippings from burning, because the last thing you want is burned drippings. And then all I'm going to do, I set my timer for 165 degrees, or my thermometer for 165 degrees. I'm going to pop this baby in the oven. I'm going to check it every 20 to 30 minutes. I'm going to turn it around, and we'll go from there. See you in a little bit. So this has been out of the oven now for about half hour, 45 minutes, and I just tempted it so it could rest. It's a little bit more uneven than I would have liked. Right there, I believe, is stuffing up against the skin. So I believe that's why that has browned more. We'll see. The stuffing in the center is exactly 165 degrees. The meat is about 175, which is really sad to me. But, I mean, that's what happens when you stuff a turkey and cook it properly. I rested it so I could do two things. First thing is it's going to relax. The muscles are going to relax and it's going to make it easier to carve. Secondly, when the muscles relax, there's a lot of juices between the muscle fibers that will have a chance to reabsorb, which will give you a juicier meat. If you cut meat, and this is for chicken, turkey, beef, whatever it is, if you cut beef right away, as soon as it's hot, with that muscle all contracted, it's going to push all the liquid out onto the plate or the cutting board. Speaking of cutting boards, I'll see you there in a second. Okay, so I took the strings off of it in the roasting rack, and now I brought them over. So what I am going to do now is start slicing this down. I have a feeling that the stuffing is not going to start until like here. So I might just do a nice cross section to start so you can see what we're working with, and then work my way to either side just for dinner. But if this was a restaurant, I would start from the end and carve down here, and this would be the portions, and this end piece, which we would leave whole, and it would be shingled away from it. This would be called the centerpiece. So if you ever hear me in class refer to the centerpiece, I'm talking about the piece that's not cut. So I'm just gonna get a nice cross section to see what we're looking like. Cuts extremely easily, probably because there's no bones. Ooh, okay, I'm gonna move the camera so you can see what I'm doing. So I accidentally stopped filming, but you can see, I hope you can see on camera, how juicy this is. Like, the meat is so ridiculously juicy and wonderful. Like, I think it came out exactly the way I wanted it to. So I put half of it over in my piggy tray. And so now I'm just going to take the rest of it, and I have my slicing knife. If you've ever wondered, you know, when we go over in class what a slicing knife is for, this is the moment. So like everything else, a lot of people like cut straight down. All that you want to do is nice thin slices, and you're going to do like, let the knife do the work. So you should not get through this in one pass, and it's going to fall apart a little bit, and that's okay. If you wanted to, you could do a thicker slice and then cut that in half. We'll cut it a little bit, the next one a little bit thicker. And then you can just lay it on down and see that's a little bit better. And you can see the cross section where all like the different muscles come together. And that's really it. This is a stuffed turkey. Or as Jacque Pepin would say, a Galantine. I'll see you in class. I had to add one final note because this ate way better than I thought it would. It was so moist and so juicy that I could cut it with a fork, and it looked fantastic. I don't expect you to do this with a turkey or even maybe a chicken, but if you wanted to try, I would definitely start with a chicken.